Thank you all so much for being here. Assalamu alaikum and good noon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Arwa Farouk. I'm this year's Abbasi Marcus Fellow, and I'm honored to be moderating today's lecture. Today's lecture is Reading Islam as Black History, Scholars and Stewards of Muslim Archival Legacies in Africa and the Global Black Diaspora. This talk is co-hosted by the Abbasi Program in Islamic Studies and the Marcus Resource Center at Stanford. The Abbasi Program is Stanford's interdisciplinary platform for research and teaching on Islam and Muslim societies, supporting scholarship, student programming, and public events that explore the diversity and complexity of Muslim cultures around the world. We also offer a minor, which is about 28 units. Please feel free to reach out to us after this event if you're interested. The Marcus Resource Center is a vibrant community space, which we are located in today, that supports the spiritual, intellectual, and social growth of students who identify with and are interested in Muslim experiences, fostering belonging through dialogue, wellness, and critical thought. Today's lecture honors the Muslim teachers and scholars, especially those in the Black Atlantic and African diaspora who, despite lacking institutional support, have committed their lives to archiving, studying, teaching, and translating centuries-old African Arabic writings. These efforts have preserved Africa's rich Islamic intellectual heritage, bridging historical ruptures, and reconnecting Muslim communities across Africa, the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Our speaker, Dr. Abdulbasit Kassim, is a Provostial Fellow and Lecturer in Stanford's Department of African and African American Studies. He is an interdisciplinary scholar of Muslim societies, specializing in the histories and intellectual cultures of West Africa and the African diaspora. Dr. Kassim's research explores the long arc of Islamic reform, dissidence, and transmission from the early modern period to the present. He is the co-editor of the Boko Haram Reader and is completing two major book projects that trace the global circulation and preservation of African Islamic thought. His work has been supported by the Mellon Foundation, ACLF, and the African Studies Association, among others. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kassim.
So my lecture today is actually titled Reading Islam as Black History, Scholars and Stewards of Muslim Archival Legacies in Africa and the Global Black Diaspora. This particular lecture was inspired by a conference that I organized at New York University, the Center for the Study of Africa and African Diaspora. I organized this conference on May 29th and 30th of last year, 2024. That particular conference was titled The Ties That Bind Black Atlantic Muslims and African Islamic Intellectual Heritage Across Time and Space. Now, when I go to NYU, I was working under Professor Michael Gomez. Professor Michael Gomez is a scholar of African Diaspora Studies. And when I got to NYU, I told him that I actually want to organize a conference that brings scholars, like Muslim scholars from the community, as well as academics as well. I told him that, for a very long time, I've had discontent with the way that academics just come together, speak to themselves, organize conference, and that's it. That's so important to actually bring knowledge producers from the community, most of whom do not have the academic titles, doctor, professor, but these knowledge producers are actually producing knowledge, their ideas are being studied in academia. Then why are we not inviting them to our academic space? So I told Professor Gomez about this idea, and he said, you know what, Abdulbasit, this is a good idea. You can actually, go ahead, give me all the resources and the support to organize this particular conference. So that conference actually fostered conversation, discussion, and intellectual collaboration among members of the Muslim community, the activists, Muslim public intellectuals, as well as academics who are studying the histories and cultures of Muslim societies in Africa and the African diaspora. The conference showcased the contributions of Black Atlantic and African diaspora Muslims to the transmission, circulation, and preservation of the centuries-old intellectual heritage produced at different centers of learning across Africa and the diaspora. The conference also honored and celebrated as well the leaders of the Muslim community who have dedicated their lives to archiving, translating, and teaching the centuries-old African Arabic writings that have remedied the legacies of ruptures and resuscitated the ties that bind Muslims on the continent with Muslims in the African diaspora, particularly in the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So the way I organize the conference, and I'm just going to stay on the slide here. So the way I organized the conference, I brought community leaders as well as academics, and the conference was divided into four different panels. I'm going to speak about some of these individuals shortly. So our keynote lecture for the conference was delivered by Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick. For some of you, Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick, he is an itinerant scholar, historian, and world traveler and religious leaders. He is the author of the book Deeper Roots: Muslim in the Americas and the Caribbean Before Columbus. He also wrote a book titled In the Art of a West African Islamic Revival, Shehu Uthman and Fodio. He had his PhD at the University of Toronto. The closing lecture for the conference was delivered by Imam Khalid Griggs. Actually, it was Imam Talib Abdul-Rashid, who is the Imam of the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood of Harlem in New York. He was the person that was supposed to deliver the closing lecture, but then he had a medical emergency, and we had to substitute him with Imam Khalid Griggs. Now, Imam Khalid Griggs is the founding Imam of the Community Mosque of Winston-Salem in North Carolina. He's a former member of the Islamic Party in North America. He's also the national chairman of the Muslim Alliance for Black Lives and the executive director of the ISNA Council for Social Justice. Imam Khalid Griggs authored the book Come, Let Us Change the World, A Brief History of the Islamic Party in North America, 1971 to 1991. Imam Khalid Griggs, he delivered the closing lecture titled The Sacred Trust, Promulgating Our Legacy as Muslim African People. Then we had different panels. Each panel had one community leader, Muslim community leader, and then 5 academics. So one community leader and 5 academics, and the community leader came and community leader delivered like the lead presentation, and then the 5 academics also delivered their presentation. So the first panel had my own manuscript teacher, my Arabic manuscript teacher, Sheikh Mohammed Sharif, who surprisingly is actually from Oakland here in California. But then he migrated permanently to Mali, and he currently lives in Bamako in Mali. I'm writing my second book project about him and several other African American Muslims as well as Caribbean and Latin American Muslims who have migrated permanently back to Africa and now residing in places like Bamako in Mali as well as Dakar in Senegal. So my teacher, Sheikh Mohammed Sharif, he is the founding director of the Sankore Institutes of Islamic African Studies International. Sheikh Mohammed Sharif, he delivered a lecture, he delivered a lead presentation for the first panel. His presentation was titled The Imperative for the Recovery and Revival of Pan-African Islamic Civilization. In the second panel, the theme of the second panel was the transmission and reception of African Islamic intellectual heritage in the Caribbean and Latin America. The lead presenter for that particular panel was Imam Hassan Enyabule. Now, some of you must have heard about the Yassin Abubakar-led coup in Trinidad and Tobago. Imam Hassan Enyabule was one of the active participants of that coup. In fact, he was a right-hand man of Yassin Abubakar, so he took part in that coup. But he currently lives in England. So he was the lead presenter for that panel. Imam Hassan Enyabule is a Muslim scholar from Trinidad and Tobago. He's also the founder of Panchayat, which is a talk show on the I-95 reading station for discussion on Islam, Muslims in Trinidad and Tobago, the Americas and the Caribbean. And he delivered his lead presentation was titled Black Caribbean Crescent, an account of Islam, Africans and the Caribbean. And then in the third panel, so the third panel, the theme of the third panel is Africans and African American Muslim presence in the United States. And then the lead presenter for that panel is Malama Aisha Adawiya. There's something I'm driving to, I'm using this conference as an entry point for what I'm about to deliver today. Malama Aisha Adawiya, she coordinated the Islamic input for the preservation of the Black Religious Heritage Documentation Project at the Schoenberg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York City. Malama Aisha Adawiya, she delivered the lead presentation titled Passing the Baton, Muslim Women, Revolution and the Elders. And then for the final panel, we had the final panel dealt with the theme of the final panel is transnational Islamic networks and cross-religious educational exchanges between Senegambia and the African diaspora. The lead presenter for that panel is Imam Adeika Mendes. Imam Adeika Mendes was the Imam Adeika Mendes translated the book titled The Spirit of Black Folk. You know, I always tell people, I think in my class, I talked about the way that in African and African American study, it's almost like a rite of passage for you to study the souls of Black folk of W. Du Bois. But what many people do not know is that several centuries before W. Du Bois wrote Souls of Black Folk, we had an Imam by name Imam Suyuti who also wrote a book titled The Spirit of Black Folk. Although, I doubt if W. Du Bois knew about Imam Suyuti's work, but in my class for this, from Black History in Islam, I had one of my students, Sadio Mohammed Abdi. She did a comparative analysis between Imam Suyuti's text on the Spirit of Black Folk and W. Du Bois, the Souls of Black Folk. She did an excellent comparative analysis of the two texts. But Imam Suyuti's text was translated is in Arabic, but it was translated by Imam Adeika Mendes. Imam Adeika Mendes is the founding director of Mount Hammer Village. Like I said, he translated the Imam Suyuti's book titled The Spirit of Black Folk, Sages Through the Ages. And Imam Adeika Mendes delivered his own lead presentation was titled The Healing Quran, Imam for the Drami and the Revival of the Janhanke Intellectual Tradition for the Modern World. Now, going to the other, so these were the lead presenters. All these presenters, they don't have academic titles. I mean, they're all community leaders, but community leaders who have been producing knowledge about the histories and cultures of the society. So they were being invited into the space where they were no longer treated as just subjects to be studied, but also as participants in the activity of producing knowledge about the issues and cultures of the society. So in the first panel, I'm just going to briefly mention, so I had myself in the panel. I had Dr. Usman Bugaji. Dr. Usman Bugaji is a senior special advisor to the Sultan of Sokoto. So Sultan of Sokoto, most of you must have known about like Sokoto Caliphate. So the Caliphate is still, even though, I mean, it doesn't have the power it used to have in the past, but it has ceremonial power. Dr. Usman Bugaji is the senior special advisor to the current Sultan of Sokoto. We had Dr. Oludamini Ogunaike, who is an amazing mentor of mine. He's a professor at the University of Virginia at the Department of Religious Studies. Then we also had Professor Beverly Mack. So some of you who are familiar with Nana Asmau. So Nana Asmau is a notable female scholar, in West Africa, and she is the daughter of Usman Amfodio, who founded the Sokoto Caliphate in West Africa. The books of Nana Asmau were actually, Beverly Mack, her entire career revolved around the literature and the text produced by Nana Asmau. She and Jim Boyd, they were the two scholars who made the significant contribution of translating Nana Asmau's work and mainstreaming it into academia. Professor Beverly Mack, she's an emeritus professor at the University of Kansas. We also had Professor Mokhtar Bunza, who is a professor of history at Usman Amfodio University in Sokoto in Nigeria. That was the first panel. And then for the second panel, we had Dr. Dawood Abdullah. So Dr. Dawood Abdullah, he has a forthcoming book. He's from Grenada, originally from Grenada. He has a forthcoming book, Islam, Race and Rebellion in the Americas, Transatlantic Echoes of West African Jihad. One of my students who is here today, Casey Christmas, is actually working on that book for his final book project. And then we also had Dr. Ayodeji Ogunaike, who is currently at McGill University, he's a professor of religion. And then we had Dr. Ganan Diaye, who is originally from Senegal, he's a professor of anthropology at Yale University. And then we had Dr. Fatima Siwaju, who studies Islam in Trinidad and Tobago as well as in Colombia. She's a professor at the University of Virginia. And then we have Vladimir Oliveira, who is at New York University. He's a PhD student of Professor Michael Gomez. And then for the third panel, We had my amazing mentor, a very good friend, Professor Bilal Ware. And Bilal Ware, he delivered one of the rousing lecture for that particular panel. So Bilal Ware, luckily for this semester, we were opportune to have him in my class, courtesy of Brother Chris, Brother Yusuf. We had Bilal Ware deliver lecture here at Stanford a couple of weeks ago, and I had the opportunity of inviting him to my class. He engaged the students in my class. Bilal Ware is a professor at University of Santa Barbara. He contested for the vice presidential candidate with Joe Stein at the last election, and he's currently also contesting for the governor of California. Then we had Dr. Yusuf Carter, who is an African American Muslim at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He works on the American Sufi community in Senegal. And then we had Sister Farah Sharif. I'm sure most of you know Sister Farah Sharif, for those who are familiar with Stanford. I mean, she delivered a lecture, a paper on Alhaji Umar Tan. And then we had Sister Samia Rahman. Samia Rahman, she is at California State University. And then we had Brother Mustafa Briggs. So my class this semester, Black History in Islam, was actually shaped. The major reading for the class was Mustafa Briggs' book, Black History in Islam. And then for the final panel, we had Dr. Isham Aidi at Columbia University. We had Dr. Suad Abdulkabir, who is at University of Michigan. We had Dr. Elena Morgan. She was once a postdoctoral fellow here at Abasi, which is currently at University of Southern California. And then we had Dr. Rasul Mila, who has also presented here as well at the Marrakesh. Dr. Rasul Mila is at the University of California, Irvine. And then we had Dr. Wendell Marsh, who is at Rutgers University. But the theme, so this conference was well organized, but it's vetted ideas about some of the things I'm doing right now and even what I will do going forward. So in this particular, in the aftermath of the conference, I had a conversation with Malama Aisha Adawiya. So Malama Aisha Adawiya, that was the highlight of this conference for me, was the conversation I had with Malama Aisha Adawiya. So Malama Aisha Adawiya, she said this to me. She said, Abdulbasit, like the generation that came before us, my generation is approaching the final phase of our lives. We have done our best, but the task is unfinished. We are passing the baton to your generation, and we hope you will continue working on the unfinished task. You know, when she said unfinished task, the task is unfinished, I was curious to know, what exactly is this task? But what exactly is this unfinished task? Now, this unfinished task, she told me that the task of preserving our legacies as people of African descent and as Black Muslims. So the purpose of my lecture today is actually to also ask both the moderator as well as the audience today that how can we contribute to this unfinished task? How exactly are we going to contribute to this unfinished task? Today we read about Malcolm X, we read about Bilal Muhammad, we read about Suleiman Diallo. These are all notes. We read about Omar Said. All of these figures are all, figures in the distant past. But they left a legacy, and it's a legacy that we're actually reading today. It's a legacy that we're engaging. It's a legacy, they bequeathed a legacy on us. The question is, what kind of legacy how are we going to participate in the continuation of this legacy? That's actually the focus of my lecture. So like all of you, several years ago, when I was in college, back in Nigeria, I actually experienced a deep wave of intense curiosity that revolved around three thematic questions. When was the past? Who are we as Black African Muslims? Where exactly are we coming from? Did we define ourselves or are we defined by others? So the first question was, when was the past? I was so curious to know, where was the past? And there was a lot of reason why I was curious about this, because the text, the literature I was studying back in college, they were all filled with different stereotypes and myths conjectures. I know that this is definitely not true, but I didn't know the alternative. There was no alternative because everything was shaped by, knowledge produced in the colonial library, colonial academy. And then the second question I was deeply curious about is, how is it now? What went wrong? I look at my society. The early African Muslim scholars were the polymath of their generation. They wrote intellectual works in virtually all fields of knowledge, including the humanities, social sciences, and sciences. I mean, now I know better. I mean, now that I can read Arabic and I can read Arabic manuscripts, I know better. I know that we have early African Muslim scholars who authored manuscript on cartography, on arithmetic, on ilmu isab. Arithmetic is called ilmu isab. Logic, that's ilmu mantik. On medicine, ilmu tib. On ophthalmology. I mean, all of these texts are actually they've been preserved, and alhamdulillah, people like myself and several other young scholars who have tried to gain like philological training in classical Arabic and classical, we are going deep into this text and excavating knowledge from this text. Now, with the wealth of knowledge and plethora of intellectual works produced by Africans, I find it really hard to grasp and fathom how Africans and black people in general and the monikers associated with illiteracy and ignorance. So when I read, for example, the works I was studying when I was in college, I read the works of people like Trevor Rupert, the Oxford historian, who said, oh no, Africans had no history until the Europeans came. And I'm like, wait, before the Europeans came, the early African Muslim scholars, they were writing manuscripts on cartography, on mapping. We have the evidence for this. You know, this is not just aesthetics for us. These are actually intellectual objects that we are studying. We know that they wrote texts on ilmu isab. Then how come this historian is saying that we had no history before the Europeans came? Or what Hegel or Kant and several of those other scholars. But then the third question that spurred my curiosity is what will the future be? What is our prognosis? Where exactly are we heading? Like, where are we heading as a society? Where are we heading as a community? These three questions: when was the past? How is it now? What will the future be? These questions actually came from the work of one of the scholars that I studied. His name is Sheikh Mohammed bin Abi Bakr as-Siddiq bin Abdullah bin Muhammad al-Talib al-Bannan. He wrote a particular book that is famous in the West African Chronicle. It's called Fatul Shukur. Fatul Shukur is one of the famous historical chronicles in West Africa, together with Tariq al-Sudan of Imam Sadi, as well as Tariq al-Fattash of Nuh bin Tahir. So the first time I read Fatul Shukur, he also identified this three questions: when was the past, how is it now, and what will the future be? But then this question for me also came from the work of one of the notable scholar that I study his work within the West African context. His name is Sheikh Adam Alilori. Recently we lost one of the icon of postcolonial studies or African studies by name Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Ngugi wa Thiong'o is famously known for his Decolonizing the Mind and several other texts that he wrote. What many people do not know is that a couple of years before Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote his Decolonizing the Mind and Decolonizing Language, Adam Alilori wrote a book, Nassim Masiba, dealing with the same subjects. But today, all the credits go to Ngugi wa Thiong'o. But people barely even know Adam Alilori, or even like Adam Alilori is barely even referenced, you know, even in footnotes of academic works. But Adam Alilori is an amazing, prolific scholar who authored books in different subjects. In my own scholarship, I've been engaging his work, but he made a particular quote I'm going to read. He said, فَإِنَّ النَّاسَ إِذَا دَعُسُ الطَّرِيقِ إنما يدرسون ماضيهم ليعرفوا من أين يبدأون حاضرهم وكيف يبنون مستقبلهم. He made this particular statement in his Nassim Masiba في أخبار الإسلام وعلماء بلاد يوروبا. So this particular text is a text of the biographical dictionary of the notable scholars in Yoruba land. So he had their names, the works they wrote, where they studied, the students they trained. All of this were all before colonialism. So he said that when people study history, they explore their past to understand their present and to build their future. So the inspiration for my question, where was the past? How is it now? What will the future be? Actually came from, like I said, Fatul Shukur, but it also came from Abdullah Adam Alilori's work. And I think one of my greatest shock when I started engaging his work, it was when I discovered that wow, everything Imam, everything is said is actually something that I mean, he doesn't get credits for it, but several other scholars get credit, like Ngugi wa Thiong'o. But there's another thing I should mention about Abdullah Adam Alilori. When I came into Stanford in fall, I attended a workshop at the law school. The workshop was on human rights. So so I was curious about that subject of human rights because I have a paper that is about to be published on the subject. But it was time for Q&A, and I raised my hand. I said I'm going to ask a question, and I said, well, I've been at first I praised I praised the speaker, but then I said that I noticed that in this lecture, all the references, all the thinkers, the theories are all the European and Western theories. I said, well, I actually have a suggestion to make. There's another scholar by name Adam Alilori who wrote a book called Huquq al-Insan. So Huquq al-Insan is human rights. And I told the audience that I would appreciate if it's possible for the students at the law school to also start engaging the works of Adam Alilori, because he has an amazing work on this subject, human rights, where he rigorously, one of the most meticulous engagements with the engagement of the United Nations human rights. I was so surprised, when I was reading this text and I saw Abdullah Adam Alilori engaging United Nations human rights. So he placed the United Nations Human Rights Charter of Human Rights. He placed this in conversation with Islamic notion of human rights, and that was his book Huquq al-Insan. But it's another funny story about Adam Alilori. In 2018, at the annual African Studies Association conference, we had a panel where we were talking about knowledge production. And then I also raised my hand, just like I did at Stanford Law School, where I spoke about the human rights workshop in fall. I raised my hand and I said that, I would love us to talk about non-Europhone scholars, and one of them is Adam Alilori. And unfortunately, a fellow Nigerian scholar told me, they said, Abdulbasit, we are talking about intellectuals, and you're calling Adam Alilori, who is just a Sufi scholar? Come on. I now told him, I said, what do you know about the Sufi scholar? He's not your regular Sufi scholar. This is a scholar that has body of works in legal history, body of works in political science, body of works in ilm al-iqtisad, on economics. He has all of this literature, but because you don't read Arabic or because you don't know this literature, you just render everything, because it's not in English, you render it as inferior, as illiteracy. I said, no, I'm not going to tolerate this. So I stood up and I said, well, I am going to talk about Adam Alilori, and I'm going to talk about him. It's important that you don't just see him as a Sufi scholar, but you see him as a public intellectual who is actually producing. And for someone like Adam Alilori, he's so meticulous and vigorous in his methodology of writing. And for some of you who read Arabic, if you doubt me, some of his works are actually at Stanford University Library. You can meet Karen Fong, because I've had this conversation with Karen Fong. She can direct you to some of Abdullah Adam Alilori's work. They are there at Stanford Library, but nobody reads them anyway. I mean, all these books are all stored in the storage. Usually when I request for them, it takes about 2 days for them to bring it back from the storage, because nobody actually reads these books. Even though Stanford actually buy these books. Now, moving forward. So for me, so Adam Alilori said, when people study history, they explore their past to understand their present and view the future. I was also, when I was in college, I was also discontented as well with the literature that perpetrated stereotypes and myths about Africans and black people in general, such as the curse of Ham, the myths that held that the descendants of Ham were caused by being black, and the Africans were thieves, fornicators, liars, and that God destined black people to be slaves. This myth became the key element behind the justification for the enslavement of African people, particularly during the 14th to the 18th century. I was also interested in understanding how African and black Muslims in the distant past defined and named themselves based on their own frame of reference rather than a linguistic reference of the enemy. I was dissatisfied with the stereotypes and myths about Islam and Muslim societies that circulated in the travel accounts of European explorers, merchants, and missionaries. Today, the academic literature on the issues and cultures of Muslim society, they were actually founded based on some of the works of these European explorers, merchants, as well as missionary. Now, when you go into this, into the archive of this missionaries as well as explorers, and in my book that I'm writing at the moment, Requiem for the West African Caliphate. The chapter 6 of the book, titled New Faith in Darul Islam, Christian Missions, Western Education, and the Souls of Muslim Folk, I actually engaged 7 different missionary archives for this particular chapter. And this missionary archive, some of this are the samples. So when you look at the missionary archive, for example, I mean, these are some of the things you see, the misrepresentation of Islam in the missionary archive. So for example, let me read what they wrote here about the advent of Islam. So in this text, they said, this is coming from the Sudan United Mission. So the Sudan United Mission was one of the 7 major missionary organizations that established mission stations around the region, historically known as Central Belado Sudan, which covers present-day northern Nigeria, western Chad, southern Nigeria, as well as northern Cameroon. So in this particular text, you can see the author of this piece said, "This Muslim menace is no mere fancy, but a stern reality which confronts us. The forces of Islam are advancing rapidly, and unless immediately met by an adequate advance on the part of the Christian Church, humanly speaking, this tribe will go over to Mohammedanism. And their decision will largely influence the surrounding tribes. Now, they are willing to listen to the gospel message. But if once Islamized, they will scorn the name of Jesus, and the present opportunity will be lost. There are strategic centers which might be occupied if we had the men, but at present, we are only able to keep one station, going where we touch but a limited area, visiting other parts occasionally. There is urgent need for an immediate advance." And then the piece concluded by saying, "If this tribe is to be saved from the fate which has overtaken so many others in Africa, the Christian Church must act now." But then there are also several other texts you will find in the missionary archive. For example, in this one, they said, "The spirit that can never rest till the last vestige of Christendom's rule is swept from the face of the earth. This is a foe more formidable than any paganism, frightful as the barbarities of the worst paganism may be. This is a fanatical fate and force which, like a devastating flood, has swept across North Africa and the Sahara, and is fast encroaching on the Negro world. The flood whose rapid movement is strengthening to engulf the whole Sudan. Workers on the spot say that this generation will see either Islam or Christianity substituting for the paganism of the Sudan. Which is it to be?" Now, this is not in any way to pit one religion against another religion. The point of making reference to this is that all of these stereotypes and tropes were the tropes that actually shape the foundational study, the academic study of Islam and Muslim society in academia. So when you go back to the early literature of the colonial anthropologists, like S.F. Nadel, Charles Kingsley, all of these colonial anthropologists, they also replicated the same trope. So Islam was presented as this Mohammedanism, this fanatical faith that needs to be crushed. When I read some of these materials, I felt discontented towards this material because I felt, no, I know that my faith that I practice is not a fanatical faith. I know that this are stereotypes and conjectures are actually not true. But then moving forward, so I was dissatisfied with I was also dissatisfied as well with the hierarchical orders of systems of knowledge that identify Europe as a privileged epistemic site that places European knowledge above all other forms of knowledge, and that treat European languages as real languages, while collectively characterizing non-European languages or African languages as primitive forms of speaking and writing. Now, this dissatisfaction and this discontentment that I had, or this curiosity, actually led me in my own journey of studying the histories and cultures of Muslim society. It led me to start studying, to learn first and foremost Arabic, but also to start studying manuscripts as well as the written legacies of Africa and the African diaspora. So my own scholarly intervention is actually anchored on the underexplored written legacies that position people of African descent as knowledge producers. These written legacies produced at different intellectual centers from Timbuktu and Kano in Africa to Bahia in Brazil actually show the multi-directional flow and exchange of ideas from Africa to the global African diaspora in the Atlantic as well as the Mediterranean Arab world. Now, there are several other scholars who have pioneered this field even before me. I am just a new continuation of the existing works that several other scholars have have accomplished. And here it is important to actually acknowledge the works of people like Stephen Dioff, the works of my mentor, Professor Michael Gomez, John Owen, Paul Lovejoy, Usman Khan, and several other scholars who have written, including Bilal Ware, the author of the Walking Quran, who have utilized some of the materials from this vast archival repository. Now, in 2022, Google Arts and Culture also funded the digitization of more than 400 pages of the Timbuktu manuscripts, spanning the 11th to the 20th century. Other organizations like the Mellon Foundation, Ford Foundation, UNESCO, U.S. National Endowment for the Humanities, South African government, they have also awarded grants for preserving and digitizing Africa's written legacy. One of the questions that we address in my class for this quarter, is a question of like, okay, now that all of these materials and manuscripts have been digitized, they've been placed online. If you Google Arts and Culture, you will find the Timbuktu manuscripts. People often talk about there's this fetishization of the Timbuktu manuscripts, but then the work of excavating knowledge from the manuscripts is actually, nobody's doing it. So people are digitizing, but then they are not translating this work. However, it appears that for now, these centuries-old primary sources are treated as objects to be exploited, as props for documentary, and not as sources of knowledge. While children in Timbuktu schools still learn, if you go to Timbuktu schools today, the children still learn about the history of French colonial conquest. What is captured in the extant archival repositories is rarely related to the residents of Timbuktu or the global African diaspora in any meaningful way. Now, beyond the fascination with aesthetics, one of my campaign and advocacy have actually been, and my own research has been centered on excavating the content of these written sources with the hope of using the knowledge generated to create a dialogue between the past and present. And here, I actually want to challenge some of the students in the room today. Some of you who are, well versed in the knowledge of tech and the knowledge of AI, this is where, if you're thinking about like, how can I contribute to this legacy? This is one way you can contribute to the legacy by building apps, by building, like different like tech models that can help and expedite the excavation of the content from all of this manuscripts. But then the other question that is also important that I'm going to talk about briefly is the importance of learning from the elders in the community. Amadou Ambakte Pa, who is a famous West African intellectual, in his lecture at UNESCO in 1960, he said that when an old man dies, or when an African elder dies, it's almost like a library has been burnt down. He said the people of black race, as they are not peoples with a tradition of written literature, have developed the art of speech in a most special manner. Why it is not written, their literature is less beautiful. How many poems, epics, historic narrative, didactic tales, myth and legends of egregious literary style have so been transmitted through centuries, carried by the prodigious memory of the men with an oral tradition, passionately in love with beautiful language and almost all poets. Now, what Mbakte Pa was trying to say in this particular quote, he was talking about the way that in our community, in African community, not only do we privilege textual tradition, but we also privilege the transmission of knowledge through oral tradition as well. And how do we transmit how do we transmit knowledge from oral tradition? It's actually by connecting more to our elders. And one of the things I did when I moved to New York, in preparation for my second project, I stayed going around to interview, to do an oral history project where I interviewed some of these key Muslim leaders. Some of these leaders, for example, Imam Talib Abdulrashid is currently in his early 80s. And Imam Talib Abdulrashid actually has, this were generation that, today, for example, we talk about Malcolm X, and Malcolm X appear like a distant historic figure. Some of these figures, they actually experience that moment of Malcolm X. For example, Malama Aisha Adawiya, as I said previously, she's the coordinator of the preservation of the Black Religious Heritage Documentation Project at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. She was a close friend of Betty Shabazz, that's Malcolm X's wife. So when people talk about Malcolm X, for her, is actually not distant past. She's currently 85 and she's on a wheelchair at the moment. I was in Atlanta where I also sat down with her, interviewed her, we talked about a whole range of experience, from her conversion, from how she converted, from her birth at Alabama, Birmingham, how she converted to Islam, but also advocacy at the United Nations, our project at the Schoenberg Center for Black Culture, but also our overseas travel. She traveled to Sudan, traveled to Mali, so these are figures that the wealth of knowledge they have. The bulk of this knowledge have not been documented in texts. And that was why I actually engaged them, by learning from their experience. But also, like I said, Imam Talib Abdulbasit, when I met Imam Talib Abdulbasit, he's the Imam of the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood. The Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood is a popular mosque in Harlem, in New York. And Imam Talib, when I met him, he told me that, he said, Abdulbasit, I'm actually writing a book about Malcolm X. He told me, he said, I have this discontent with the way that Malcolm X is being portrayed. In some literature, and he's talking about Patrick Maney and Alex Haley, he's saying in some literature they downplay his religious identity. In other literature, they just explain Malcolm X. The fixation is on his contribution to the Nation of Islam. I actually feel that there's several other narratives about Malcolm X that's not been written, and I'm writing a book. This is what he told me. He said, I'm writing a book to offer this alternative reading of Malcolm X. I pray that he's able to complete the book. But as I'm speaking with you right now, he's actually even is going through like a difficult medical emergency. And my prayer is that Allah should recover his health to the state of normalcy. So it's important, as students, for you go into your community, engage with some of these elders, sit down with them. They have wealth of knowledge. Ask them questions. Some things that you read in books today that appear as distant as history. For example, when we talked about the Yassin Abubakar-led insurgency in Trinidad and Tobago. Today, Casey, you and I, when we read those materials, it feels like oh, that was long ago. But Hassan Yabale, who I showed this picture previously, he participated in that insurgency. Like, he knew everything that was happening. He was at the TV station when they announced, he was at the parliament. So these are people that have wealth of knowledge. So sit down with them, especially now that you're going for summer, find time to sit down with these elders, engage them, and if possible, record with their consent, by the way. Record, and even start a preliminary oral history project. Record this history is so important. The other thing that is also important as well, and I will try to conclude as soon as possible because of time as well. And yeah, I will speak about my this probably will be like the last thing I will talk about. I will speak about my own another way you can contribute, which is something that I did after my PhD. So after I completed my PhD at Rice University, I asked myself, how can I honor the scholars whose works I studied in my PhD in the course of I had lots of troubles in my PhD for some of the positions I took in my scholarship. But then I told myself, how can I honor some of these figures? So what I did, with my meager resources of just $2,000, I created an endowment in honor of the scholars. So what I did, I created research scholarship, 7 different research scholarship in their honor. And the reason I did that is because I look at our universities today, whether it's Stanford, Yale, we have different kind of research scholarship endowments named after several other people. For example, you might hear something like John McLean, scholarship, this scholarship. But I rarely hear the names of Muslim scholars or the people that I study, So I said, well, I'm going to start by, I created this endowment, research scholarship, in honor of the scholars. So I created a first one. It's titled the Hamalat al-Ilm fi Dar al-Ulum Research Scholarship. This research scholarship is named in honor of the group of 10 scholars who were popularly known as the Hamalat al-Ilm fi Dar al-Ulum. So Hamalat al-Ilm is the Arabic term for the bearers of knowledge in Borno. These scholars rejuvenated the intellectual traditions, culture of literacy, and historical scholarship in Borno in the period before the 19th century. So there are 10 of these scholars whose works I study and whose works I'm writing about in my book at the moment. So there's Sheikh Mohammed bin Al-Hajj, Abdurrahman Al-Khatib Al-Hajj Al-Barnawi. He died in 1746. There's Sheikh Abdurrahman Al-Yamini Al-Ajrami, who flourished in 1790. There's Sheikh Abu As Umar Mama, who died in 1799. There's Sheikh Muhammad Al-Qadi, who flourished in 1800. There's Sheikh Shatima Ahmed Al-Makrani, who flourished in 1750. There's Sheikh Ahmed Dani, who flourished in 1790. There's Sheikh Mustafa Ahmed Al-Hajj, who flourished in 1800. There's Sheikh Tahir Ibrahim. All of these scholars, I have their writings. So these are not just like anonymous scholars I'm calling their name. I have all their manuscripts, stored in my computer. There's Sheikh Abdurrahman Dawsi, who flourished in 1790, and there's Sheikh Ahmed Al-Mahir, Kutub Al-Arab, who flourished in 1800. So these 10 scholars, collectively, they were known as the Hamalat al-Ilm for Darabonu. So I created one scholarship in honor of them, and the scholarship is actually meant to support students who are going to be studying the works of the scholars, who will be reading their works, and who will use their works to produce new knowledge. The second that I created was the Maghribian Wangarawa Research Scholarship. This scholarship is named in honor of Sheikh Abdurrahman bin Abdul Karim Al-Magili, Sheikh Abdurrahman As-Sikin, Sheikh Abdurrahman Zagaiti, and the Wangarawa scholars who facilitated the intellectual exchanges between the Maghrib and Hausa land from the mid-15th century, around 1450. So one of them is Sheikh Abdurrahman Muhammad bin Abdul Karim Al-Magili. I delivered a lecture about him at the Center for African Studies last fall. I delivered a lecture about his idea on divine sovereignty and political theory. There's also Sheikh Abdurrahman Sikim, who flourished in 1549. Al-Magili died in 1505. I have his body of text. It's called Al-Mal al-Kamila, about 60 compilation, or 6 volume of his work. There's also Sheikh Abdurrahman Sikin, as well as Sheikh Abdurrahman Zagaiti, who flourished around this period as well. And then the third one I created was the African Arabic Historical and Biographical Literature Research Scholarship. This scholarship is named in honor of the scholars who contributed to the documentation of historical and biographical literature. In Arabic, it's called Tabakat. In Central Bilad Sudan, there's Sheikh Ahmed bin Abi Bakr, is known as Omar Kokoro. There's Sheikh Umar bin Abi Bakr Ramadan, Umar Falke. There's Waziri Junaid. There's Sheikh Abdullah Adam al-Lori, who I mentioned in the course of this lecture, and there's Sheikh Sharif Ibrahim Saleh. So all of these scholars, each of them, and this is the titles of their the titles of the books, some of the books they authored. They have several books, but these are some of the titles of the books they authored. Now, each of the scholars, they created biographical dictionary, Tabakat, where they listed all the major scholars of the different regions, but not just listing them. The books that they authored, the different sciences that they specialized, the student they taught, and where they themselves learned from. I also get to learn as well their travels, their rihla. In Arabic, it's called rihla. Their travel literature, like travel literature to Baghdad, travel literature to Jerusalem, travel literature as well to Maghrib. Some of this literature is what I'm actually using in my own research. So I created one for them, and then the next one I created was for community historians. So I titled the Community Historian Research Scholarship. This scholarship is named in honor of the chroniclers and translators who documented the histories and cultures of Muslim society in Central Bilad Sudan in African languages. The scholarship honors the service of Sheikh Isa Talata Mafara. Last fall in October, I delivered a lecture at UCLA. At UCLA, I delivered a lecture on the Arabic Its World, based on the works of Sheikh Mohammed Isa Talat Mafara. Then there's also Alhaji Maji Ahmed Bungozo, who is a community historian in Kano. He has a particular work that he called Tari in Kano, the history of Kano. There's also Al-Khali Hussein Ahmed Sufi. I spoke about his twin sister in my lecture that I delivered at DAS. His twin sister is Hassan Ahmed Sufi. There's Sheikh Ahmed Mohammed Salisu Gumbi and Malam Ibrahim Kurawa. Some of the scholars, all of them are all community historians. Community historians, they're not formally trained in like historical study, like in academia. They don't have any title. They don't have PhDs and all of that. But their works are so important because the community read their history, their historical work, even though they don't have academic titles. And then lastly, I think it's the last slide. And then I also created another one for Diasporic African Muslims Research Scholarship. This scholarship is named in honor of the Muslim scholars and authors who contributed to the globalization of African Islamic intellectual heritage. The scholarship honors the service of Sheikh Mohammed Sharif who is my teacher. He's from Oakland, California. There's Dr. Abdullah Akim Quick, originally of the Caribbean descent, but he was born in the US in Boston. There's Imam Talib Abdurrashid, who I said is the Imam of Muslim Brotherhood. There's Sheikh Adinka Mendes, who is of Brazilian descent, but he was born in Houston, Texas. And then this Malama Aisha Adariya, who worked at the Schomburg. So this, and then the final one, Muslim Educators Research Scholarship. This scholarship honors the figures who pioneered the pedagogical framework of combining Islamic and Western education. The fund honors the historical scholarship of Alpha Idris A. Owanimashawu. Alpha Idris A. Owanimashawu, he was the proprietor of the first government Muslim school that was established in Lagos, Nigeria. He founded that school on 15 June 1896. And then there's also Chief Imam Mohammed Lao Basil Augusto. Basil Augusto is among the Brazilian returnees who returned from Brazil back to Lagos, and he was the first Muslim lawyer in Nigeria and also founded the Muslim Literary Society. Then there's Sheikh Mohammed Tuku Kamaluddin, who is the founder of the Hazar Arabic and Islamic Higher Education. There's Alhaji Abubakar Imam, and there's Sheikh Ibrahim Okpani Nwangwe. He's originally of the Igbo tribe in Nigeria. But all of this, what they have in common is the fact that they were Muslim educators, and they created schools that try to blend Islamic and Western education together. So all of this, why is this important? I will just cite one. This is an archival source from Times of Nigerian newspaper, December 8, 1919. And I'm going to read this. This will be the final slide. So this slide said, this is talking about the Muslim experience in Lagos in 1919. In this paper said, "Oh ye Muslims of Lagos, what in the name of common sense can you advance as an excuse for actually neglecting such a very great and important factor in the life of your children as their education? Is it because you are not financially well off to meet up the demand? Not in the least. Every day, thousands of pounds you are wasting on trivial and worthless matters. Now, O ye Muslims of Lagos, is the time and the right time to show to the world at large that you yourselves, as your brethren in the other parts of the globe, to show to the world at large that you yourself, as your brethren in the other parts of the globe, can manage and maintain the education of your own children. As a matter of fact, you know the value of education. Experience has shown me this. The man in the street can tell you this. Oh, ye Muslim of Lagos, what then is preventing you from establishing your own schools? I mean schools founded and maintained entirely by you, the Muslims. £1,000 will not be too much for you to subscribe for the sake of your own children. You will be no fool to do it. Thousands of Muslims are doing it in other parts of the world. Oh, ye Muslims of Lagos, put your wise heads together, form plans, bring out money from your pocket, found schools, or at least school, get teachers out from England, India, and other parts of the countries to add to the few ones you may be able to get out here. Then, and not until then, will you know where you're going. Oh, ye Muslims of Lagos, both old and young, I appeal to you in the name of the Almighty Allah to launch upon a plan, form committees in the different quarters of the town, discuss points and show one another what the results may be to get out here. He said, "O ye Muslims of Lagos, I appeal to you in the name of the Almighty Allah to launch a plan, form committees in the different quarters of the town, discuss points and show one another what the results of the discussions are. It is indeed a serious matter which needs serious consideration. O ye Muslims of Lagos, schools founded, maintained, and run entirely by the Muslim community are very urgently needed. Where are you? Are you all fast asleep? Thanks for the space allowed." This was written in December. So I got this from Times of Nigeria, December 8, 1919. But it was sent. The author of the piece sent the piece on November 17, 1919. Surprisingly, I mean, I was born actually on November 17th. So this person, November 17th. So this was a far cry. Well, lastly, it's important for us to be ambassadors of our tradition and cultures because we all have a vital role in preserving and promoting our rich heritage. And this is exactly what I try to do in my course this semester on Black History in Islam. I would love to stop this, I won't take much time, but thank you so much. Sorry.
Thank you so so much. This is a really interesting and inspiring talk. So I'm a reference librarian at Green Library, and Karen is a wonderful colleague. And I have a question about your opinion on the perils and possibilities of AI, which you kind of referenced a little bit. I know a lot of scholars have observed that currently, if you ask ChatGPT something, the corpus of information that it's pulling from is very Western-centric, very English language-centric. And so there's that bias there. And so some scholars have proposed, trying to put more different language sources into AI in order so that its answers are more balanced and more representative. But then there's also the ethics of AI a lot of people have qualms with in terms of the way that it's getting that information, the exploitation there. So I'm just curious to hear your opinion based on how you view the opportunity of that, or again, the perils of it, based on this huge corpus of material that you're working with and that you want your students and other students to access. How you feel about that question. I know it's kind of a big topic, but it's something that we're dealing with a lot at the library, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. And I have to say that, one of the highlights of my experience here at Stanford has actually been the library resources. So it's really good to know that you work at the library as well. I mean, if I leave Stanford, as I'm preparing to leave Stanford, I have very good opinion of the library staff and the way they've supported me while I'm here. I think to answer your question, yeah, I mean the bias, the use of AI is actually evident, is glaring, and there are even before AI, I think the ethical question started from the digitization of some of these materials, even before AI, because for some families, they feel that there's something they call sociology and pedagogy of knowledge. That some of these materials is not just enough for you to know Arabic, but you also have to, there's a piecemeal type of pedagogy that is used to study some of these materials. So for some families, for some scholars, they have actually been concerned that once these materials have been digitized online, people just go ahead and study these materials online without necessarily following some of the routine, like the pedagogy that needs to be adhered upon, in studying some of this material. So they've been that concerned. And in fact, in the case of Niger, the British Library has this program called the Endangered Archive Program, where they digitize different manuscript collections from different Muslim West African families. But we've had cases where some families protested, and they protested and they requested for the materials to be pulled down from the British Library because they felt that the way people are using their materials is they feel that people are flouting the pedagogical framework that they have established for how they want their materials to be studied. So, and now we are in the age of AI, and it's important for we want people to have access to these materials. It's important accessibility is an important issue. But I would say the way my own position on this is, I think it's important for the tech companies to have a sort of partnership and partnership with some of these families, or institutions or local libraries across different West African communities that have this depositories, like what Google did. So Google, for example, they established a partnership with the Muhammad Aidara, the archive in Timbuktu, and based on that partnership, they were able to digitize more than 400,000 pages of that manuscript, which is now available online. So they didn't flout any copyright issue. But even for that particular project, the Aidara family, they provided a framework of how to study the material. So if you go to the Google Arts and Culture, there's a foreword, where they explain that to read this material, you should start with so text. And then once you've completed this, then you can go forward to the next. So they gave like a pedagogical kind of framework so that people wouldn't just immerse themselves into the text and study it, haphazardly, So there's a need for more more partnership, that sort of partnership, between the AI companies and I would say some of the archives, local libraries, because that's the only way to make some of this material accessible. And in conclusion, I will also say that it's also important. I mean, the thing about AI as well is that the language, it's important to hire more like specialists in non-European languages, particularly like Arabic, like Farsi, who can actually do the proper programming. Because I mean, in some instances where I've tried to use like ChatGPT, I mean the Arabic is so bad. I feel like who are the people who are putting this information out there? So I think it's important for them to also hire like qualified linguists who are properly trained, who have like certification in the field, who can do the work. And now the good part is that we have a growing field in Arabic and Islamic digital humanities, and this is my hope that field, the more it grows, some of this shortcomings we've identified, like in the AI, is going to be eventually resolved.
Do you have time for more questions?
Yeah.
Big portion of your class here at Stanford has to do with which canons we use. And today you bring up now the topic of a particular pedagogy of studying materials. I'd love to hear more about that. How do we determine whose pedagogy is correct? What's the reason for having a certain pedagogy to study certain things? We'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, the importance of pedagogy, especially when it deals with like the importance of pedagogy is some of these materials, they are structured in like beginner, intermediate, and advanced level. So I will give an example of like jurisprudence. So in West Africa, the major Islamic jurisprudence is the Maliki jurisprudence. Now it's going to be really like bizarre for a student, no matter how proficient you're in Arabic, to go and pick like Muwatta or Mudawwana or Muwatta of Imam Malik or Sahnun of Mudawwana without reading like Izziya, Ashmawiya, like the preliminary text. So the importance of the pedagogy, it's a form of curriculum, but it's also a form of like, how do you study the text? But the pedagogy also cultivates a sort of like discipline and memorization for this text, because the way some of these texts are being taught, they are being taught in a way that they want you to embody the knowledge. That is why Bilal West's book was about the walking Quran. So that even when you don't have the Quran, you are walking with it. It becomes part of you. So part of the pedagogy, the way they teach some of this text, they cultivate this discipline, discipline of memorization. They cultivate discipline of bridging orthodoxy and orthopraxy. So not only are you going to have knowledge about what you're reading, but because it's already embodied in you've embodied it, there's this consciousness when it comes to practicing what you've actually studied. So you're not just reading it or studying because you want to have like A+ or grade A, and then once you're done, it's all over. But they want you to study and make that knowledge ingrained in you that keeps shaping your life going forward, whether it's religious subject or non-religious subject. So those are the type of pedagogy that the scholars. So Sadio,
how do we determine which one is correct?
You mean
Yeah.
Oh, it's almost like a unified pedagogy that the scholars have.
Or can a pedagogy be correct, or is it more neutral?
So if you see the text, I would refer you. Yeah, I understand your question. Yeah. If you look at one of the texts that I assigned for the course is a primary source written by Abdulbasit. It's titled Idaw Nusuk. Sadio actually wrote she wrote a review of that particular text. And Idaw Nusuk, if you look at the module, the syllabus, the week where we talked about Islamic education, learning, and scholarship, there's a particular, you can go back to the syllabus and check. There's a module, the text is Idaw Nusuk. And in that text, Abdullah Fodio actually explained like the nature of the curriculum and syllabus of to study, but also the pedagogy, how should those materials be studied? You know, how should they be memorized? And Abdullah Fodio, you know, explained that in the Ida on the Silk. But then, I mean, in the modern Western education, we completely follow like a different kind of like pedagogy. You know, for some scholars, they've tried to create a synthesis between this Islamic pedagogy and the kind of like pedagogy that we focus on, like that we employ or deploy, you know, in the Western academy. Some in some environments they've been able to succeed. So if you know about Indonesia, they have this system called pedestrian. I've forgotten the title. So they have this. Is anybody familiar with Indonesia here? So they have this. I forgot. It's a kind of like a Malay term where students from the madrasa, they enroll them in like boarding school, and then they teach them the Islamic pedagogy, but they also train them as well in the Western pedagogy. Some societies have actually succeeded in synthesizing and blending this together.
So the Western, our pedagogy here could never be considered Islamic.
Well, it cannot be considered actually Islamic. I mean,
Gotcha.
yeah, it can be considered Islamic.
It cannot be.
No. I mean, the way we study, like the instructor-student mode of teaching, that's not like the mode of teaching. You know, we don't even do rote memorization here. Like, you know, there's no any class in this pedagogical framework where you'll be compelled to memorize the text you're studying. You know, and for most students, they just want to pass the course and get an A plus or A, and then move on with their lives. You know, but our own kind of pedagogy as well. There's no like spirituality attached to it. You know, it's all for like, you know, for material purposes. You know, so those are some of the differences between our own pedagogy, like the Western pedagogy and the Islamic pedagogy. I don't know if you have any. I don't know. I believe I answered the question.
You answered.
Okay.
Any last questions?
So I haven't really thought about this. So I went to school here, and I'm part of the listserv, and this is the first time that I'm learning about you here as a scholar. I don't know why this hasn't been publicized more, because I think a lot of people in the community would have probably attended or wanted to see some of your lectures while you were here. And I don't know whether you connected with the African American community here. We have a rich African American community here in the Bay Area that goes all the way back to, I think, Malcolm X, like Anthony Shway, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, he came here.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Did he listen? Did they meet?
He was not here then.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. But yeah, so you guys need to do a better publicity, whoever's running the MSA, the MSU these days, because this is the first time. But anyway, what you just said scares me a little bit, and I haven't really thought it through. Okay, this is the first time that I'm actually even thinking about capturing traditional knowledge using AI. I would think that you would want to embrace AI to be able to preserve the knowledge that you just mentioned, right? So there is some preservation because you're naming all of these people and you know who they are and their history. So there is some preservation going on. I can't imagine any better tool than AI to be able to preserve this knowledge. And I'm not sure how different it is from Catholicism or the study of Buddhism or any of the other religions in terms of the pedagogy that you're talking about. So I studied with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. Have you been to Zaytuna College?
No, I know Zaytuna College, but I've never been.
Oh my God. And you're leaving already?
Yes.
Oh my God. No, you should have met. I mean, most of the scholars there are African American with a long history.
Yeah, I met Sheikh Abdullah.
Sheikh Abdullah, good.
Yes.
He's one of the main ones. Okay. But you can input all of that into AI. You can teach AI Arabic. And that's going to happen. So maybe it's not good today, but it will be, good tomorrow. So I would think, I don't know how old you are, but you seem like you're very young, 20s and 30s. But I would think that you would want to embrace AI to be able to preserve what you've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Jazakallah Khair, for your comments. Yeah, I mean, AI is definitely important, and like I said in my lecture, it's important for like students to, help in building apps, building more of this model that can help in further preservation of the materials, but also accessibility as well. I think the only reservation I have with the AI, I think it's important for the AI companies to work together with the scholars.
Yeah, definitely.
To work together with the scholars,
It's in development.
exactly, so that they can then, like what Google did, the Google Arts and Culture, the materials, more than 400,000 pages in books and manuscripts is online, but then they also gave a sort of like forward, preface, preliminary information about, if you want to engage this material, this is, maybe you want to start with this, then if you've completed this, you can move to this, that will not be made possible if not for the fact that Google actually had this partnership and a relationship with the scholars in Mali, because they were the ones that came up with that framework. So if Google had just decided that we're just going to digitize the materials and they put the materials online, it would just be left there and people would just be only interested in philology, that once I understand Arabic I can just plunge into these materials.
Yeah.
But it's not like that. There's a system of studying the materials.
AI is all about interpreting. I mean, that's all it does, is just interpret knowledge. And that's why I think in your generation, working directly with AI companies is going to be very, very important. I would not even think about not doing it because, it has to be a scholar, teaching, and we want to, imbue this spirituality. Yeah, that's all important. But AI is the future, and if we do not become part of it, we're going to lose. We're already kind of lost. We're going to lose even more. My question was actually, I wasn't clear on what the problem that you stated was. Is the problem that the Western world doesn't know the contribution of Africa to Islamic literature? Or is it a problem within the Muslim world that Muslims themselves don't know the legacy of the African contribution to Islamic knowledge? To be quite honest with you, none of our masajid uses many of the African scholars. I see the problem being within the Muslim community. And then as far as the Western world is concerned, I don't think they even think about including anything, like any Islamic sources, regardless of the race, regardless of the person's background. So what's the problem?
I think the problem is like on twofold. There's the first problem of paucity of knowledge about this legacy within the Muslim community.
Yeah.
But that paucity of knowledge is also shaped by the Western colonial schools. Because for example, you go to like Nigeria, all through the time I was in Nigeria, 4 years college, I was taught about, I read David Hume, Immanuel Kant, Arthur Schopenhauer, Feuerbach, Descartes, but nobody actually mentioned Al-Maghili for the entire 4 years I was in college. So I will tell you a brief story, and this happened during my PhD. When I was, I did my PhD at Rice University. So as part of the PhD, you have to write a comprehensive exam. And for the comprehensive exam, there are usually 4 exams. And one of the exams was philosophy of history, methods and theory, philosophy of history. Now, when they gave me the bibliography, 100 books, it was all littered and filled with, Immanuel Kant, Descartes, and all of those German Enlightenment scholars. Then I approached the director of graduate studies. I told the director that, all of the scholars, none of them even have any good things to say about Africans or black people in general. Like, they all have nasty things to say, and their works are not so important to me. I will not privilege their work in my own work, so why am I compelled to study them? So I told the director that I have another list of scholars that I would love to study, because the works of those scholars are more relevant to my own scholarship than this German Enlightenment scholars. But then the director of graduate studies then told me that no, this is a standard syllabus. It's a standard curriculum that everybody must study as long as you're getting your PhD in religion. I said, okay, no problem. I'm going to study the standard syllabus. But can I, in addition to the standard syllabus, can I add an additional syllabus with the readings of the African scholars whose works actually like have more value to my own scholarship? Then he said, well, we need to confirm which African universities are the works of those scholars being studied. These African scholars you mentioned, where are their works being studied? So they told me to go and bring syllabus and curriculum from African universities where their works are being studied. So I called my friends at Bamako in Mali. I called my friends at Sheikh Anta Diop in Senegal. I told them, can you give me your syllabus? Like, let me just prove a point at my department. I called my friends in Nigeria to send their syllabus. When they sent me their syllabus, it's the same complaint I had. That was the same. It was the same syllabus, you know. So at the end of the day, I approached the director of my graduate study, and I told him, I said, see, I have contacted several like academics at other African universities, and unfortunately, the syllabus all looked like the syllabi looked the same. I mean, then he said, well, it means that the works of the scholars are not being studied. So how are you going to write your comprehensive exam about the scholars if their works are not being studied? But then I insisted that I want to write my comprehensive exam. I want this scholar's work to be included in my comprehensive exam. Well, to cut the long story short, my advisor came in and intervened, and he said, well, yes, what Abdulbasit said is important. The works of these scholars are important, and since I know Arabic, that's my advisor. He says, since I know Arabic, I can examine him on the works of the scholar. So at the end of the day, all the students in my cohorts, they had under bibliography to study for the philosophy of history, methods and theory for that exam. Well, I had 175 bibliography to study. So I studied, but you know, it was additional work, but it was an additional work that gave me fulfillment. You know, I was really, and the syllabus I created for that exam is now in my department. So in the future, if there's any other students who want to make similar claim, they can just pull out the syllabus and you know, and allow the students to write the exam. So I will tell you, this system is not going to change.
No.
But there's a need to actually.
You don't need it to change. Just create a parallel system.
Yeah, but there's a need to also like bring in. It's an additional work because people want you to study Foucault, for example. They want you, but I would say that, well, I will study Foucault, but Foucault is irrelevant to my work. I have other scholars that I'm actually going to bring into my work. I mean, one last example I will give. I mean, in my department, I remember when I first came. So I'm in the African and African American Studies department here at Stanford. My department chair, Professor Kassim, when I met him, and we're talking about the kind of courses being taught in the department, and he told me he's teaching a course on Toni Morrison. I'm like, wow, that's really good. So I told him that, oh, how about you teach a course on Toni Morrison and Asana Ahmed Sufi? And I was like, Asana Ahmed Sufi, who is Asana Ahmed Sufi? I said, well, Asana Ahmed Sufi is just like Toni Morrison. You know, she has a body of literature, works, thematic works, and bodily. The kind of thing that Toni Morrison writes about is exactly what she writes about as well. So how about you have a course designed like Toni Morrison and Asana Ahmed Sufi, bring their works together? And Asana Ahmed Sufi was the first woman to attend the School of Arabic Studies in Kano in northern Nigeria. Our body of works are at Northwestern University, but guess what? When I was in Nigeria, I had no idea about who this woman was. No idea about her. I didn't know anything about her. I didn't know her work. Guess where I found her work? Northwestern University in Evanston, Chicago. That was where I found the work for the first time. So despite the fact that I'm from Kano, I had no idea of this woman's work when I was in Kano. It was until I came to Northwestern that I found the work. So it's important to like create a space, you know, for other thinkers, because I always tell people that for some of the works of the scholars that we study, especially the European thinkers, there's nothing new to say about their works. All their works have all been, the ideas have been exhausted. I remember when I was at Rice University a couple of weeks ago, and a student walked up to me and told me, Dr. Kassim, I am writing a dissertation on Nietzsche. And I told him, Nietzsche? What are you going to say about Nietzsche that is new? Everything about Nietzsche has been exhausted. You know, there's nothing about Nietzsche you're going to say that is new. Rather, work on other scholars that all the scholars I mentioned here, they are all new scholars. Most people have not heard their name before. Like when I stood up at the Stanford Law School, the human rights workshop, and I talked about Adam Adilori, that's the first time most people in that setting are hearing that name. But I nudged them towards that. That's beside all of these human rights theories you're talking about, there are other theories that I've also written on this subject. You could also benefit them from their knowledge.
So thought-provoking and such a wonderful discussion, but we are at time. Thankfully, I think the question that I wanted to address in my final closing question was you so beautifully addressed. I was just very curious as to how we, not just individually but as communities, especially within the Muslim community, can encourage like what we can do to actively like increase the presence and uptake and commitment to this scholarship. And I think you touched on a lot of those points. Inshallah, we're going to be closing off, but I just want to give a round of applause to you once again for sharing so much. I'm walking away from this with so many different ways in my mind of like of preserving this intellectual heritage. And I think just to close off, one thing I really appreciate is the emphasis and focus on like futurity and like and that and presence and moving into the future from these histories. But yeah, would you like to share any closing remarks?
Well, yeah, I mean, the closing remark I would share is to the Baroque Center. I know that the Baroque Center here at Stanford, I mean, it's been my pleasure actually for Brother Abdul and other people at the center, if at least you could come up with at least one endowment, even if it's for Umar Said. Even if it's for Umar Said, like come up with a scholarship in honor of like some of this notable African Muslim leaders, even if it's Umar Said Research Scholarship. Because that's also a way of preserving their legacy. That's a way of honoring and preserving their memory. You know, anytime anybody Google like Baroque Center and they see Umar Said Research Scholarship, it spurs a kind of like, you know, curiosity in them. Even for someone who doesn't know Umar Said, they'd be like, oh, for his scholarship to be named in his honor, let me try and Google his name. You know, so please, I will urge the Baroque Center to think of doing something like that. But thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Abdulbasit, for the invitation, and I'm so grateful. And thank you for your attendance as well.
Thank you.